United Nations has come to Russia's aid. The United States, together with Europe, has imposed several sanctions on Russia during this period. This has had an impact on Russia's economy. But in the face of the West's dirty tricks, Russia is not without help. Like India, Iran and other good friends have been helping Russia to circumvent the sanctions. And recently, Russia has also welcomed an unexpected helper. A few days ago, UN Secretary-General Guterres is trying to reach out to the United States, the European Union and the United Kingdom, said UN Secretary-General Dugueric. The aim is to get these countries to ease sanctions against Russia in order to achieve a smooth export of Russian fertilizers. It is important to know that the United Nations has been under the influence of the United States. Has also often used the UN as a tool to fight its opponents, and now it is strange that it is helping Russia in turn. But in fact, the United Nations is also forced to do so. Today, many places are suffering from a serious food crisis, and many countries are asking the UN to make efforts for this. If Guterres does not solve the food problem, the UN will sooner or later become chaotic. And with the help of the United Nations, it can also ease part of the pressure of sanctions on Russia. But in fact, facing the crackdown, Russia is also ready. Putin has already made a move against the United States. A few days ago, the Russian Communist Party said that it was time to bring Alaska back to Russia's embrace. After that, there is also news that Russia has started the relevant political procedures. Whether the agrees with this or not, this could become a point of contention between Russia and the United States. It is important to know that there are several states in the southern part of the United States that are not formally obtained. With Russia hitting the head, Mexico can also follow Russia's lead. When the time comes, the United States will also have some bad trouble to solve. Therefore, Russia can take this matter to counteract the United States, and ask the United States to relax the sanctions against itself. If the still insists on going against Russia, then Russia can counter the. In another matter, the is now considering easing sanctions against Russia. Increased risks in financial markets and the need to adjust Russian oil prices. The often capricious attitude of the has long been clear to allies and other countries, but what Europe did not expect was that they were put in a position by the at a time when they themselves were already in deep trouble. Sources close to the matter cite that the administration led by President Joe Biden is now reconsidering the conditions for enforcing price limits on Russian oil, with plans to ease the idea of restrictions. Seeing that the current high oil prices are making the whole country suffer, Biden had announced last week the release of 15 million barrels of strategic oil reserves, but the results are still unsatisfactory. In this situation, Biden had to further modify the decision to set price limits on Russian oil sanctions, but this is a heavy blow to Europe. The had spent several months pressuring Europe to implement further sanctions on Russian oil. The original intention of the was also to stifle the Russian government's revenue in the oil sector by imposing price limits on Russian oil. After the was so adamant and persistent on the issue of the G7 capping Russian oil that the Treasury Department's Assistant for Economic Policy said that the G7 would use 3 major phases to gradually impose price limits on Russian oil. The first stage is to start formal sanctions on Russian crude oil on December 5, followed by Russian oil, and finally other products such as naphtha. The Treasury Secretary also proposed to cap the price of Russian oil between $40 and $60 per barrel in the hope of reducing Russian cash flow from there. Now the United States apparently does not intend to continue to do so, seeing as the November midterm elections are approaching. High inflation, especially the continued emergence of high oil prices, make voters quite dissatisfied with Biden, and now the Biden administration has to deal with the problem head-on. Biden admitted in his speech that high oil prices have caused the majority of American families to suffer. According to reports of former Officials related to the news that this issue on the price of Russian oil set a ceiling. After the official effective date of December 5, 80% to 90% of Russian oil can avoid the price ceiling. Normal circulation. Russia's sales in the oil sector in September was $15 billion. Russia has said that it will not continue to supply oil and other products when there is no money to be made. In recent days, there seems to be some delicate balance on the Russian-Ukrainian battlefield. Both sides claim to have repelled each other's attacks. Russia accuses Ukraine of preparing dirty bombs, and Ukraine accuses Russia of increasing its troops to cover up casualties. But in this dull tug-of-war, however, behind this dull tug-of-war, the mentality of European countries is changing little by little. According to Reuters and other foreign media reports, a demonstration of more than 10,000 people broke out again in the Czech capital Prague, demanding that the pro-Western government step down and hold early elections, and immediately negotiate with Russia on gas imports. The reports also mentioned that the demonstrators displayed the slogan "Russia is not the enemy, the warlike government is the enemy." Czech Prime Minister Fiala later responded on social media that the government understands the difficulties of people's lives and is trying to solve them, but there is no option to be independent of both East and West, and that the Czech Republic must become part of the West. We are shocked by the Prime Minister's diode thinking. What does it mean to be not independent of both East and West? What do you mean by part of the West? Why do you think independence means independence from the East and the West and not coexistence with the East and the West? What's more, no matter how the Prague authorities present themselves as the Western world, the Czech Republic will always be an Eastern European country, and being part of the West means being an enemy of Russia? Sometimes it is hard to understand the thinking of Western governments, probably because we are too normal to fit in with them. As an aside, many netizens know that the Russian-Ukrainian conflict is a hole dug by the United States for Europe, and that it was dug directly in front of Europe, blatantly, and then Europe jumped right into it. The first thing you need to do is to get a good idea of what you are getting into. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has again criticized the EU's policy toward Russia, declaring that sanctions have not met its expectations, but have backfired on the EU, hurting European countries. He said, "The EU's decision to impose sanctions on Russia is like digging a hole for Russia, and Europe fell into it. What to do next? The EU thinks it should dig the hole deeper, but this idea is problematic." This is not the first time Orbán criticized the EU sanctions against Russia. As early as 2 weeks ago, he pointed out that now European countries have to pay higher prices for food, energy, necessities, and are actually paying for the sanctions, and this high inflation is not caused by market factors, but by artificial political factors. He also warned that EU sanctions would not have a fatal impact on Russia, but would instead contribute to the fall of EU governments. The reality seems to be moving in the direction Orbán suggests. Norway and Italy have seen a change of government, and right-wing and far-right political forces are rising in Europe. Germany, France, and even the United Kingdom, which has already left the European Union, have seen popular protests. Some countries, such as the Netherlands, have started to adopt a roundabout tactic to curb the removal of sanctions against Russia. It is clear that the European countries are in a quarterly contradictory state of mind. On the one hand, the increasingly unbearable cost of sanctions, and on the other, the so-called free world values, the Czech government being the prime example. When Czech Prime Minister Fiala cried out that there is no independence from the East-West camp, we knew that the boy is wasted. First of all, the East-West camp is full of a strong taste of the Cold War, forcing the world apart, thinking only of either/or, thinking only of being a brick and moving where the wall is built, but never of being a bridge between East and West. But they never thought of becoming a bridge between East and West.